Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Malice in the Mitten. I am your host, Tracy Preston, along with my bestie, Christine Mulligan. Hey, Christine.
Hey, Trace. Hey, everybody out there listening. All right, so what are we getting into today, Trace? You gonna tell me some horrible stories?
You know I am. That's what we do. So today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. And this is an active missing person who is on the autism spectrum. And this man's parents, they need our help. So let's get into it. This is season 5, episode 4, Gordon Page Jr. Now, the Oxford Dictionary defines malice as, quote, the intention or desire to do evil, ill will. Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines it as, quote, desire to cause pain, injury, or distress to another. But if a person causes distress, harm, or evil to befall another individual due to good intentions gone wrong, does it still count as malice? If a person or persons act upon information given to them by professionals and it causes harm to another, is it malice? Gordon Page Jr. was born on April 15th, 1963, to his parents, Gordon Page Sr., and his wife, Linda, in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Gordon, or Gordy, as he was called, was the first child of the couple. Not having much experience with children, the Pages could tell he was developmentally behind other kids his age, but just thought he was slow and that he would catch up eventually. Countless visits to doctors when he was younger reinforced the idea that he was just slow. No doctor could give him a diagnosis of what made Gordy different from other children his age. As he started school, the differences became more noticeable, as they often do. Gordy couldn't do simple math, such as addition and subtraction, but he could read and memorize. Communication was difficult for him. He was bigger than other kids. He was clumsy. As his two brothers, Lance and Todd, joined the family, the Pages realized he would not outgrow his awkwardness, and they struggled to understand him. But they never stopped loving him and wanted to find help for their son. The doctor visits with no answers continued. They watched as Gordy grew and his classmates started dating, driving, and working, things that were a world away from what Gordy could do. He became a loner as he couldn't keep up with his peers, and he was left behind. His junior and senior years in high school were difficult for him. While his peers socialized, he withdrew. While he did learn to drive, he never got his driver's license, which was ironic as Gordon Sr. owned multiple car dealerships. Gordy graduated in 1981 and got a job as a grocery bagger at a local food store. He came home so excited to share the news of his job with his parents. He was excited to be making his own money, although it was only minimum wage. But it was more than that to Gordy. It was a step towards independence. His parents' hopes for their son were raised, but it was not to be. His father would hide and watch his son work. He was so proud of him, but his differences made customers uncomfortable. His inability to communicate, the fact that he stared at people while smiling as a way to say hello, and avoidance of crowds. Although his father coached him on how to smile and to say hello, it wasn't enough, and soon he would be let go from his job. As Gordy was growing, his parents were aging also, and worried about what would happen to Gordy when they passed on, as eventually we all do. So in 1988, they met with social workers to set up a plan for when that time came. The social workers recommended a group home. A group home now would give Gordy time to adjust while still having his parents available when he needed them. Although hesitant at first, eventually they agreed to the plan. They hoped it would be what was best for Gordy, that it would give him some independence. However, the group home had a policy that all residents must have a medical clearance from a doctor before they could live there. The Pages took Gordy to the doctor, who tentatively diagnosed him as possibly schizophrenic and placed him on Ritalin and Valium. Now, Ritalin is a stimulant drug used to treat ADHD as it improves focus and reduces impulsive behaviors. Side effects can include hallucinations, thoughts of self-harm, irritability, and confusion, to name just a few. Valium is a benzodiazepine or a tranquilizer used generally to treat anxiety disorders. The side effects can include trouble with balance, itchiness, and thoughts of self-harm. Double-blind studies done show that a combination of the two drugs can cause memory issues and issues with alertness. Neither drug today is typically prescribed as a treatment for schizophrenia. When the wrong drugs are prescribed for mental illness, the results can be disastrous. Once he started on these medications, Gordy began to change. He began experiencing physical and psychological torment. He became almost catatonic. He believed cats were scratching inside his brain. He would shriek in the middle of the night when his parents would enter his room. They would find him crumpled up on the floor and moaning. The Pages would call the doctor, and they were told it was just Gordy adjusting to the medication and that it would take time to have the desired effect. For nearly 5 months, they waited for the adjustments to begin, but they never did. In September of 1989, the Pages moved to Florida, where Gordon Sr. became an automotive consultant. Listening to the social workers, they left Gordy behind when they moved to Florida in the group home. When Gordy first moved into the home, it seemed as if it was the solution that would work. His parents were optimistic. Then, on November 29th, 1989, a workman left his truck running in the driveway at the group home. Gordy saw the truck, and wanting to see his brother, who was going to college in Texas, he hopped in and took off. Not having a license and not much experience driving, as you can imagine, he caused an accident. He walked away from the scene in a daze. He walked to an elementary school where he entered and tried to convince staff that he was there to teach a class. The police came and took him to a psychiatric hospital. While initially a disaster, it would lead to correct diagnosis and treatment and relief for Gordy. In the hospital, he was seen by other doctors trained in the function of the brain. The doctors realized he had been misdiagnosed, and rather than being schizophrenic, he was in fact a high-functioning autistic. The medication he was on, rather than helping him, was in fact harming him. He was gradually weaned off the medications, given some respect, and they began to teach him life skills. In March of 1991, Gordy was accepted by a group home called Cascade Foster Care Home on the corner of Kraft and 60th Street in Grand Rapids. Cascade Home had been built specifically for adult autistic people that could not live independently. The goal of the home was to teach life skills and help patients gain a measure of independence. It has since been torn down. When he moved into the home, the Pages were told to help Gordy adjust. They could not see or visit him for 2 months. Although it was difficult, the Pages listened to the experts once again. In May, Gordon Sr. drove to Michigan on May 22nd. Gordon Sr. came to visit Gordy at the home. The waiting time was over, and he was excited to visit his son. They talked and visited for a bit. Then Gordy walked his father to his van. It was time for Gordon Sr. to return to Florida. Gordy tried to get into the passenger side of the van to come with his father, but as the orderlies took him away, Gordon Sr. drove off to return to Florida, believing that leaving his son there was the best thing for him. Little did he know he would never see his son again. 4 days later, an orderly doing a midnight bed check noticed Gordy's bed was empty and the window was open. Raising the alarm as the search was started for the missing 28-year-old, a fireman would report about an hour after the alarm was raised, seeing Gordy hitchhiking toward Interstate I-96. Now, I-96 runs 192 miles east and west across the state, going from Detroit, Michigan to Chicago, Illinois. If Gordy had actually been heading toward the interstate, he could be anywhere. One thing Gordy loved was baseball cards. He would recite stats from his favorite players. He had cards he carried with him at all times. Approximately 6 weeks after he disappeared, a baseball card collection was found under the overpass of I-96. They were found near ramps leading to Chicago and Detroit. 3 of the found cards were Gordy's favorite players and are believed to be a part of his collection. Over the years, reports have come in from all over the country of sightings of Gordy, but he has never been found. His parents have never stopped looking for him. On January 25th, 2018, at the age of 81, his father passed away. Gordy is listing as a surviving son in his obituary. His mother, Linda, is still alive, and she is still looking for her son. Gordy was 6'3" tall at the time of his disappearance. He weighed 175 pounds and had red auburn hair, and he wore it short. He may or may not have facial hair, but only under his nose and on his chin. He has blue eyes. He has a surgical scar on his pubic area to repair an undescended testicle and white scars from acne on his back. He has a brown mole on the inside of one of his legs and several white discolorations on his teeth. He has a small scar on his chin and a tan birthmark on his ribs. He may respond to the names of his brothers. He left the home barefoot wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Today, he would be 61 years old. His hobbies include collecting sports cards, shopping for sports memorabilia, antiquing, playing basketball, and swimming. Due to growing up with automobile dealerships, he may hang out at them. He has been reportedly seen collecting bottles for cash and at various homeless shelters. If you have any information, please contact the Kent County Sheriff's Department at 616-623-6246. Oh my God, these poor parents. How awful.
Yeah, there's a part of me, though, that thinks maybe because he was highly functioning autistic, I mean, just knowing that doesn't really tell us that much. I mean, anyone that knows anyone that's autistic, it's, what's the saying? Forgive me if I botch this. For those that are involved more with autism, they always say, if you know somebody with autism, you only know that one person with autism. You don't know autism because everyone, the spectrum is so vast and wide. So I feel like you gave us an impression of him through your story, but at the same time, knowing the little that I know of autism, how highly functioning was he? Was he in regular classes when he went to high school? Did he make it through regular classes? Was he that highly functional? Or was he in, I mean, when I was a kid, the special education classes, we used to call them happy classes, and I love that because the kids that were in special ed, at least in my school, they were always happy. So we called them happy classes. So to me, I'm always like, was he in happy class? You know what I mean? Was he in special education? Did he get special education? Or was he highly functioning enough that he was in regular classes, just possibly in the slower realm of each of those classes? Does that make sense? You following me?
Yeah, I'm totally following you, and it totally makes sense. They didn't really say, but I would assume so. So I was watching Unsolved Mysteries. They did a segment on this kid, and it was very interesting because his dad, like for example, like his parents worked with him all the time. And, one thing with his kid, I'm sorry, I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit, but his feet were kind of turned out a little bit like ducks. So he has a really unique walk as well. But like his dad would put down 3 oranges and 2 apples and, he would count them out and he would say, okay, there are 5 pieces of fruit on this table. Gordy, how many pieces of fruit do you see? And he'd say 5. Okay. Then the dad would take 2 of the apples away and he would say, okay, now how many pieces of fruit are on this table? And he's like, 22. You know what I mean? He just couldn't grasp that kind of thing. But now when they said he had, he really was into baseball cards, he was like, what was that show with Dustin Hoffman? Wasn't he autistic? Remember? And Tom Cruise and his brother Tom Cruise like took him because he could count cards and stuff like that.
No, Rain Man. How do you not know the movie is Rain Man? Yes, Rain Man.
Because it's been a minute.
Everybody knows Rain Man. Mm-hmm. But yes.
So he's kind of like that, and his dad was always working with him, like, shaking his hand and trying to coach him on how to speak, like, hi, my name is Gordy, because he was working as a bagger, and back in the day, remember, they used to actually take your groceries to your car and load them up for you, and he would just stare at people. Or he'd have this big smile because his dad's like, smile big. And, say, if someone says to you, well, thank you, smile and say you're welcome. And like this kid just had deer in the headlights look, like he couldn't comprehend how to do that. So,
yeah, back in the 80s, society at large weren't as accepting that we are now, thankfully. But that's, you know me and all my stuff, representation matters. And before the 80s, representation for autistic or handicapped adults wasn't prevalent like it is today, thankfully. So now, with representing them in society, people are more able to accept. I don't know if accept is the right word, but people are more aware and they know how to deal with people instead of just feeling really creeped out. So I can imagine in the 80s, in the late 80s, that shoppers probably felt creeped out if they weren't familiar with his disability in any way, shape, or form. They would be afraid of him instead of understanding that he just thought different. His brain worked differently, and his social aptitude wasn't what they would expect. So I can imagine that it was probably hard for him. I had a mentally handicapped uncle, and he appeared normal. I don't even really like to say that, but there's no other way to describe it. If you looked at him and he didn't say anything and he wasn't doing anything, you wouldn't know that he was mentally handicapped at all. He didn't have any physical features. However, once and pleasantries was very easy for my Uncle Stephen. It wasn't a social issue that he had, but he had like the mind of an 8-year-old, kind of. He couldn't tie his shoes, so as a grown man, he wore Velcro shoes so he can do his own shoes every morning, and nobody had to tie his laces for him. So it was things like that. Like he never learned how to tie shoes because that was frustrating for him. He never really learned how to read, even though he could read some things. It was really more just things that interest him. He would know what they said. Like, say something said Mario Kart. He would know it said Mario Kart, but was it the letters that did it for him, or was it the font that did it for him? You don't know. You know what I mean? And he worked at a grocery store, and he was a bagger, but he was social enough that it worked. And also, it was a little bit later than the 80s. It was in the 90s and the early 2000s when he was doing this. So more people were aware of mental disabilities and the fact that mentally handicapped people, if they were able to, were out in the workplace, especially in positions like that as a bagger at a grocery store. So it was a little bit easier for my uncle. And then again, he was very highly functional, and he wasn't autistic. It was, he had brain damage from when he was a child. Anyway, before I go all the way down that rabbit hole, not everyone accepted him, and some people did get creeped out by him. What interested me about the story you just told about Gordy is that this wasn't the first time that he escaped from a group home. So perhaps Gordy really didn't like being there, but he couldn't get it across to anybody, and he couldn't get anyone to understand that he might not be surviving or functioning in society the way they would like him to, but perhaps Gordy was like, but I'm fine. I'll be just fine. Maybe he wasn't as bad as they thought, but because of his autism, he couldn't communicate that well, because he stole his brother's car and tried to run away, but then they got him back. And then he was left there, and the family was told not to communicate with him for a while. And what was it, 4 days or so? Is that 4 days later? He was like, screw this, I'm out. And he left. So I want to believe I guess because I don't want him to, something have horribly gone wrong with him. I want to believe that he chose this for himself. He didn't want to be kept. He wanted to go live his life.
I agree with that because, his parents were extremely involved with him and, they spent so much time with him. I mean, that was home, that was love. And what is so sad is that these two parents were trying to do what was right, following the advice of the medical world. Like, you're going to have to put him somewhere. You guys are not going to be able to care for him. I mean, for crying out loud, his dad lived until he was 81. His mother is still living. He could have been with them this whole time. And it was really sad too, because in the show on Unsolved Mysteries, like, it was a couple months after he had been in this new home, right? And his dad came to visit him, and then he had to leave. And it was so sad because, his dad got into his van. There's an orderly on each side of Gordy, and they're trying to walk him away to get, into the van. So it kind of looked like maybe they were off-site somewhere where he visited or whatever. And this poor kid, like, turned around and tried to get in the car with his dad. And the door was locked, but the dad thought, okay, I've got to do this. I've got to pull away. I can't let him get in here. You know what I mean? So it's like they took his son, and it was just so heartbreaking, just that whole scenario. And I'm sure his parents have regretted it every single moment. And it was like a hop, skip, and a jump after that visit that he escaped. He's like, I don't want to be here.
Yeah. And my mind always goes to, well, imagine what if it was bad for him there? I mean, I know it was a group home, and I don't want to, I don't want to pish posh on other people's care or whatever, but we all hear those horror stories about how people are mistreated in homes like that. And also, this home has been torn down since then. So, I don't know. Maybe it wasn't that great. Maybe they were mistreating him there. Like, maybe that's why he was trying to get away with his father so bad. And obviously, that's why he ran away. Because he's never run away from home when he was home.
Right.
But he from these two homes twice. You know what I mean? I don't know. My heart, like, I was listening to the story, and I was immediately thinking of my Uncle Stephen. And everybody always treated him like he couldn't take care of himself. But he lived with my grandmother until she passed. And then after she passed, he lived for a couple of years with one of his brothers. And then he ended up living out the remainder of his years with my mom. Yes, he couldn't drive, but for the most part, his day-to-day activities, he could handle himself. You had to prod him, you had to nudge him a little bit, but he did everything else himself. It's not like anybody was bathing him or changing his diapers. He didn't have diapers. I'm using that as an analogy. Nobody had to take care of his bodily functions for him. Nobody had to assist him in the shower. He could do all of those things. So he was an independent person. He just couldn't live in society independently. But I don't know. Like, immediately, that's where my brain was. So I kind of was associating Gordy with my Uncle Stephen. Maybe that's not completely, I don't know, politically correct or what have you, but I was relating to it in that way. And my heart was going out to him. Like, he just wanted what he wanted. Because I remember my Uncle Stephen, like, if you wanted to feed him something that he didn't want to eat, or if you made something for dinner, he was like, no, well, I will just call such and such, or no, can you please drive me to the grocery store, because he wanted to get what he wanted to eat that night. You know what I mean? So there were some things that he was very adamant about, like, no, I know what I want to do, and I know what I want to eat, and I'm going to do it. You know what I mean? Not that happened a lot, but it happened. So I guess I'm kind of, I don't know, transferring some of that to Gordy without even knowing him. But by doing that, it instinctively makes me feel Gordy was just not living the life he wanted to live. So even though he may have chose a harder path, because you said he's been seen in homeless shelters and out on the streets, and he's been, they think they've spotted him a few times. Maybe he was running because he didn't want anybody to lock him up in a home again.
Right. He wanted his family. He wanted to be around his loving family. And he, like your uncle, he was very highly functioning. Like people didn't have to take care of him. He just couldn't, handle the day-to-day life decisions kind of a thing. And he certainly didn't have the ability to communicate. I mean, his poor heart must have been just absolutely broken. Like, why is my family keep leaving me here?
Yeah, it's a shame. It does make you wonder. Maybe he was out there trying to find his family.
That's what I think, And it's like, what the hell? He has no idea where he's at. He doesn't understand, this road. He's just probably thinking, well, if I get on this road and I walk this way, I'll find them.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, that breaks my heart. This story was heartbreaking.
It is.
In the beginning, like, is it malice? I guess you were referring to, medical advice and all of that. Like, is it malicious that they did that? I never think that it's malicious when, well, of course, I shouldn't say that because who knows what the home was like. Maybe they did have malicious intent on some of the things they were doing. Maybe it was about a money grab, you know what I mean? And then they just had, bodies in the facility, but they didn't really treat them like humans. You know what I mean? Maybe it was malicious. But medical advice, especially with anyone on the spectrum, if they are not as highly functioning and they can't communicate, I don't know. Like, that's a really deep question. Is it malicious when medical people are telling you what they think you should do or what they perceive and never really listening to the person that has the issues? I don't know. Like, he was communicative.
Just not that great, right?
It breaks my heart a little bit because I don't think the intent was malicious, but the results ended up being a little malicious. There was malice in the results. I'm just not sure about malice and intent.
Yeah, and I mean, he was just completely misdiagnosed. I mean, schizophrenic versus dealing with what we need to deal with autism and just slapping him on those drugs. I mean, he was never on any medication when he was at home. And he was always a good kid. He was a sweet boy, a good, nice guy. And they throw him on these drugs. And I mean, it was just awful. Like, he would just scream in the middle of the night. Like, he became a completely different person. But the poor family, they're like, well, this is what we have to do. The doctor said this is the right path of treatment,
Yeah, that's always the thing. Ugh, I don't know. That's always the thing is medicine is the practice of medicine. And I think that's why it's so important for people to educate themselves on anything they're dealing with, whatever ailments or issues or effects that they're feeling, symptoms, side effects of medications, whatever it is. Everyone always needs to fully educate themselves on whatever the issue is. And unfortunately, at this time, in the late 80s, there was not much known about autism. We've learned a lot in the past 20 years about autism as a whole. So there were a lot of people mistreated. Just in past podcasts, we've talked about insane asylums and how hysteria was a thing, and how we've mistreated mental diagnoses and misdiagnosed mental diagnoses for a year and a day. And we don't know better until we know better, unfortunately. And I think Gordy was being diagnosed at a time where they weren't really fully equipped to diagnose him. So medicine was busy practicing, but they certainly did not have anything right for him, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. And at this time too, like the internet was just kicking up, right? In the late 80s, like the parents just didn't have the information at their fingertips like we do now. And like you said, we have come so far in learning about autism and of course other mental illnesses. It's just, it's very heartbreaking. And I feel for the parents, I feel for his brothers, and I certainly feel for this man. And it's, I wonder, like, is he still alive? Why would he let go of those baseball cards? Those meant everything to him from the time he was just a little guy.
immediately wonder, has he ever been to that place before? Was that close to where he lived? Did he ever walk past that underpass with one of his brothers? Do you know what I mean? Like, did he leave them there for a reason, or did he leave them there on accident? Like, these are the things you'll never know, but it makes you wonder.
Like dropping breadcrumbs.
Yeah, because actually, I can tell you a story. There were instances where my Uncle Stephen would want to go put something somewhere because he had a memory there. Do you know what I mean? Or he'd want to go visit somewhere because my Uncle Stephen was also in the Special Olympics. He used to bowl and all that. So Special Olympics, like, they get together, they do events, it goes on for years even after you're in it. Like, once it's a social network kind of thing. So he would have girlfriends, and I use air quotes around them because he wasn't autistic, he was mentally handicapped. So his girlfriends were also mentally handicapped, and for him it was his girlfriend, but it's not in the same context that you or I would say I have a girlfriend or a boyfriend. It's not the same. So they would talk on the phone a lot, and they would meet up at events and stuff like that. Well, one of his girlfriends, they were together for years, but via telephone and maybe a date once or twice a year. You know what I mean? Where their moms would take them both out to dinner together, and they would sit at a separate table and have a date. Things of that nature. But she had passed away. She had other medical issues, and she eventually passed away, and it was a whole big thing. So for years after this girl had passed away, Stephen would want to visit certain places that they had their dates at and leave something there. So that immediately, that's what, when you said that his collection that he treasured was left there, I immediately wondered, had he ever been there with anybody else? Did he leave them there for someone? Because that's something my uncle would do all the time.
That's intriguing. And
they would come back for it. Do you know what I mean? Even though we knew that wasn't going to happen because girlfriend was in heaven. Or maybe he did it as like what's the word I'm searching for? As like a tribute kind of thing. I don't know. I don't know. Or did he think that she would come and get it? I don't know. That's what I thought when you were saying that. I did have that. Like, maybe he left it there because it was familiar to him and he thought somebody would come and get it.
Yeah, that's a great point, and something I never thought of. So, who knows? Wow.
Yeah. Well, that was heartbreaking all around, but at the same time, and I understand that it's heartbreaking for the parents, and they may be left with a lot of guilt, but that's 2020's hindsight. We know now what we know about autism, but back then, that's not what we knew. Even schizophrenia was still a little bit of a mystery, and that had been a diagnosis forever. They overdiagnosed people with schizophrenia. I think they still do, to be honest with you. However, back then, it was even more. If you thought in any different way, you were schizophrenic, almost.
Mm-hmm. It's like a blanket diagnosis. They're just slapping on things they just don't really understand.
Right. And even with the medications, like, it was like, even still to this day, it's whenever you need any kind of medications like that, psychotropics or benzodiazepines or whatever, it's a trial and error. They have you take the medications to see what happens. And if they don't work, they switch them up. Mm-hmm. And if they switch them up. It's trial and error. It's practicing medicine, unfortunately. And that's what we forget a lot of the times. We know a lot about a lot, but we don't know everything about anything.
That's right. Absolutely true. So I just want to throw it out there just one more time that Gordy was a very tall, lanky man, right? So again, 6'3", lanky. His feet are weird. Again, they kind of bow out to the sides like a duck feet. He's got a really interesting walk. Red hair. So I don't know if he's still out there. If he is, I hope that someone who hears this can report it. So again, I'm going to give that number for the Kent County Sheriff's Department, and that is 616-623-6246, and he goes by Gordy. So fingers crossed. I hope he can be found. So thank you, everyone. Thank you. Oh, by the way, before we sign off, just want to say, yes, of course, please come back on Wednesday for Round Robin. But this Friday starts our new show, and it's called F-Bomb Friday. And that's folklore, fables, fiction, and frights. So don't forget to come back on Friday to hear some of that. Our first show is going to be The Michigan Dog Man. So thank you, everyone. Oh, and by the way, sorry about all that weird noise about halfway through the podcast. That's my Bouvier. He was snorting. And we're all stuck with it. So anyway, thanks, everyone. Have a great week, and we will see you on Friday for our new show. Take care, everyone. Bye.